Thank you so much, Watson. That's a huge help.
All right, so we have located our minutes taker, and I guess I will attempt to watch the Jabber, but if someone else is willing to watch the Jabber as well and bring anything to the audio stream that is appropriate for that, that would be great. But I think we should get started. So hello everyone, welcome to SAAG. I am Ben Kaduk, and Roman Danielu, my co-AD, is also sending video. So welcome everyone, and we will get started. So I will attempt to advance the slides, and we see the note well, which hopefully is not new to you. Normally the SAAG is meeting on Thursdays, so it's almost certainly not new, but we are earlier in the week this time, and this is just noting the IPR regime under which we're operating. All of the key information is in the BCPs, but this is just a summary here. And if you have not read it or are not familiar with it, please do take the time to look through. The meeting is being recorded, of course, and the attendance will be generated automatically from the data tracker data. So to the agenda, we've got the usual working group reports and the AD reports lined up, and then Michael Richardson will talk a bit about a topic that was actually discussed at a previous SAAG meeting. And then we've allocated a big chunk of the rest of the time to sort of this broader topic of how the IETF should approach post-quantum security. So we've got a few slides set up to sort of tee up that discussion, but we really expect it to be a pretty open-ended discussion. So are there any agenda bashing? Please get into the queue if you want to propose something else or change the order, anything like that. But I think the default assumption, on the note in the queue yet, is that we will be able to go ahead. So I will step forward to the... Yeah, I'm not seeing anything either. So I guess we will go to the working group summaries. Of course, we are on Tuesday. Panos asked to send a screen. I guess that got retracted. So since we're on Tuesday, there's only a small number of groups that have actually met already. So I put those broken out separately. So GNAP met and sent a report, as did IPSecMe and LAMPS and RATS and SACM. And of course, the chair slides are uploaded in the data tracker, so the clickable links are available if you retrieve the slides from there. And we had SecDispatch as well. There's, of course, quite a few working groups that are meeting later in the week, many of which already sent in their reports as well in advance, so thank you for that. I was not expecting so many reports in advance. But, of course, for everybody else, once your group has met, or if you meet and something unusual happened, please go ahead and send the updated report or the actual report after the fact as well, and we will enjoy seeing those on the email list. And then there's just a couple more groups meeting later in the week. There's also some groups that are not meeting. We also got some reports from a few of those, so thank you for that as well. I guess we got trans just before the meeting, and then Stephen reports Lake as well, which did not make it into the slides. The trans report, of course, is roughly just saying that the working group is going to close, which is always exciting that we can declare victory. And there's, of course, plenty of related topics that are not officially in the security area. We had the Danish BOF just in the previous session, which was really interesting. And it looks like we will have some discussion on the email list about what the actual charter would look like. And I think we got some emailed reports for at least a couple of these as well. I think I saw Utah and the NIST lightweight crypto. I forget if it was a competition or not. They have some activities going on for that. And we got a CFRG report. The SINS BOF. Roman, do you remember when the SINS BOF is? I lost track of that. It's later in the week, I believe. And you're muted.
Going to find it. It's Thursday, session 2.
Thursday, session 2. All right, so that's for skim, sort of revisited, basically. Richard, you're in the queue. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, one other BOF to note. Immediately after following this meeting is the Oblivious HTTP BOF, which is bringing some additional privacy features to HTTP. Might be of interest to this crowd.
Yes, thank you. That was a fairly obvious omission on our part, so we appreciate getting that pointed out. That's definitely of interest to this audience. So if anybody else wanted to mention some activity that's been going on in these other sort of related groups, please go ahead and join the queue. I will pause here for just a moment and try to catch up on the chat. Watson, go ahead.
I will shamelessly promote Rough Time. We're going to a working group last call on one part of the whole ecosystem. If you need secure time, that's happening in NTP. Sadly, conflicts with previous HTTP, but that's where it's happening.
Thanks. Okay, I think the queue is empty. So let's go to the sort of AD status report. So we currently have 4 drafts that are being AD sponsored, and a 2-and-2 split. So I have 2, one of which was just sent to the RFC editor within the past week or 2. And I have another one that went through the IETF last call and got a lot of comments. Many of the comments were not actually in the form of direct actionable changes that could be made to the text. So there's been a bit of work between me and the authors to try and interpret these comments into an actionable form and see what changes we can make to the text and what that's going to evolve into. So there's not a whole lot of progress there. And then Roman has sort of picked up a couple of these relatively more recently. So Roman, did you want to say anything about them?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the first 3 documents we ran through Sec Dispatch, so everyone should be aware that we're AD sponsoring. Just that last one is a new addition to my queue. We're doing some coordination with W3C on updating some of the identifiers for XML Sec. So given the coordination with another SDO, we didn't actually run that through Sec Dispatch. I picked that up just outright. We're going to need some eyes on it as we put the finishing touches on it. So expect a call pretty soon on that.
And that call will be to SAAG itself, right?
Put on SAAG first.
Okay. I hear some reports in the chat that maybe I'm too quiet, so I can try to adjust my volume a little bit. We didn't have any particularly noteworthy new highlights to call out here, but we have sort of the usual couple of things where we have this list on the wiki of typical issues that come up in security reviews, which we encourage many people to look at. It was originally written actually with our fellow ADs as the audience, but certainly working group chairs, document shepherds are encouraged to look at it. Hopefully we can get security issues fixed earlier in the process, or not even have them at all. And then these last couple links are just sort of the AD dashboard and the data tracker for the documents that the respective ADs are working on. And they show you which documents are in the publication requested state or out for IETF last call, and all the other states that they're in. It really sort of gives you all the information in a single place, and it's very useful for us, and it can help you see sort of where our workload is and get some sense perhaps of how quickly we will be getting to your document. And next slide is the big thanks to all of the sector reviewers since IETF110. We say this every time, but it's worth repeating that it's really helpful to have these sector reviews. and to get extra eyes on these documents. So thank you again. We really appreciate the work that you do for us.
To double down on what Ben said, absolutely, it's invaluable to us as we look at the comments from IETF last call and to help prep for the telechat review. So every one of those names is appreciated. Thank you.
All right, and that was the end of the AD report. So we should go over to the attack taxonomies, and I have to find the different slides. All right, hopefully the slides are coming through. Michael, excellent, you're already sending, so please go ahead. Unless you have a local mute. I am not hearing you, Michael. Is anyone hearing Michael?
Hi there. How about now?
Hi, I hear you now. Excellent.
Okay, good. So I brought up this topic a few IETFs ago on the SAAG list, and mostly because I was getting frustrated with not knowing what certain documents were saying when they said certain assumptions about things. Next slide, please. Or am I doing that? You're doing that. So traditionally we have Alice and Bob and they communicate. Next slide, please. And most of us understand that Mallory in the middle here, traditionally it's man in the middle, but many people have replaced it with Mallory at this point, is intercepting all the traffic and can do things. And this is the typical, I'll say the name Doilov Yao attack. Mallory can add messages, delete messages, modify messages, and of course view them along the way. And so this is pretty clear. And if this is what you mean, then it's pretty easy to understand. But there's some variations that really are important. So next slide, please. One of them is Mallory can observe, but cannot delete, cannot insert, and cannot modify. And in this case, but can observe. So our traditional defense against, historical 20-plus-year-old SYN spoofing attacks, if you can observe this thing, then you actually get to defeat the SYN spoofing attack because you can see the magic secret SYN numbers that are being transmitted and therefore do things. And this is sometimes people think this is have called this an on-path attack, and sometimes they haven't. And that's the purpose of this discussion, is to figure out what to call this. Next slide, please. So there's another kind of attack which people think of. Okay, Mallory can insert messages, can't view them, can't delete them, and can't view them. I said can't view them there, but can send traffic to Bob and attempt to attack them because they're, everyone's on the internet apparently and can communicate. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of variation of a couple of the different things. In this case, Mallory has an ability to view messages between Alice and Bob. And what's represented by the fact that the link between Alice and Bob is a little bit circuitous is that Mallory has a better link to Bob and can, without actually being able to delete any messages that Alice sends to Bob, is able to send a new message that looks like the same message that is being sent and is able to race it to Bob such that Bob sees it first. So Bob thinks the message has been modified, but if Bob would just wait another couple, maybe milliseconds, actually it would get the legitimate message from Alice. This is not such a crazy attack. Most of the bent fiber attacks could probably do this. And we've seen a lot of attacks involving BGP and other things like this, where attackers essentially could divert traffic through their network. And if their network was faster than another network, they can do things. So next slide, please. Well, it's pretty busy. So Doilev Yao attack. So number one is there, view, delete, modify messages. But what do we call 2, 3, and 4? Okay, so 2 can view but not delete or modify. 3 cannot view but can send new ones. And 4 a variation of 2. So next slide. So as I said, many people are quite happy with the concept that we would replace the word man and man in the middle with Mallory. And so we retain the acronym MITM there. And the MITM attack is usually the Doilev Yao attack, but not always. So the other suggestions I've seen is on the side in the rough. And I've seen a couple people say, well, what does rough mean? And it's a golf term that means that you're not on the fairway, you're out in the in the woods somewhere, and that's the case where you're not actually on the connected at all. Next slide, please. So from quick, we have on path, limited on path. That's really confusing to me. And off path attack. Alan de Kock suggests the council of attackers, the malicious messenger, the oppressive observer, which are designed to be both terms to be alliterative, and off path attacker. And next slide, I think that's the last one. Yeah. So do we need to do anything? Okay. So I would like to have terms that I could think we agree with. And there was a interaction I had on one mailing list about 2 weeks ago when I had to say, well, wait, did you mean type 1 attack or type 2 attack? Because there's 2 different effects of this. And well, the answer is it was unclear. And that's why I think we need to just pick some terminology and stick with it. Some questions. Lots of things go by. I guess come to the microphone, right? Can't pick anything. Stephen asked about the reflection attack, and I don't know if that is that a new kind of attack that's not clearly done by something that is either on the side or in the middle. Yeah, as Ted Hardy says, bike shed once and for all. Yeah. Anybody?
Okay, DKG, go ahead.
This is Daniel Kahn Gilmore. So I appreciate the concern that we don't seem to really have a great set of standardized terms. I am really reluctant to settle on terms like Mallory. It creates a kind of an in-group game. I mean, it's fun to play that game. Like, oh, we all know who Eve is. We all know who Mallory is. I don't think that's particularly useful because I think it actually alienates people. And what we want here is to be communicating with more people. So I think
I agree with you.
Being very clear about the terms, I think things like on path, things like active versus passive, I think we're just going to need to stick with descriptive terminology.
That sounds great to me. So you would go with on path attack, active on path attack, passive on path attack, and off path attack. If I understood you.
That sounds reasonable to me. The shorthand for the full blown thing, if we want to keep MITM, is machine in the middle. It's not gendered. Okay. It's not a fancy term, and it reminds people that it's not a human being.
That's a really good suggestion. I hadn't heard that one before. That's a really good suggestion.
Okay, Robin, I think you're next.
Hi, is the mic on?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I went to machine in the middle as well. And then it struck me that actually the problem in that one isn't the first M, it's the second M. Because in the middle refers so clearly to that first positioning of Mallory between Alice and Bob. And it's a much less clear description of the off-path attack, so the passive, what is sometimes proposed as ghost protocol, where the attacker is not actually directly interfering in the path, but, for example, gets a copy of Alice's keys.
Right.
Yeah. So I do favour the descriptive labels, and I'm not quite sure then what we do about either of the M's in MITM. Sorry about that.
But it sounds to me like you're actually saying that a passive attack would also be described as a machine in the middle.
Well, a machine off to the side.
So that's my thing. Is I don't want to say it's in the middle. I would say it's a machine in the side, and that's why I would want to be clear about the position. Exactly.
Yeah. So I like the labels, but I think maybe the time of MITM has maybe passed. I think. Sorry. One other thought about this is, it is really interesting to look at that set of attacks, and then think, if I were trying to describe the encryption between Alice and Bob as end to end, where would I draw the line for the ends? Where would I draw the circle that includes the ends and excludes Mallory. But I know we've got a couple of IDs on definitions of end-to-end, and so I'm probably going to wait and see what they say.
Sure. So I'm hearing lots of good ideas here. I'm also trying to keep in mind what the path forward is and sort of where we should continue this discussion. We have hit the 10 minutes that we allotted for this topic, but I think we were a little early, so I'll give us another 5 minutes or so, and let's hear from a few more people. But it would also be interesting to see who would be interested in working further on this and what sort of form you think that work would take. If we should try to make a listing or collection of all the different types of attacks we could think of, and then try to classify them and give them descriptive names, as was mentioned before, or something else. Happy to hear your thoughts. So Watson, you're next in the queue, and Robin, if you could lower your hand.
Thank you for this work. I think it's very important. One thing that's missing that we've seen a need to talk about is sort of global passive adversary, particularly in censorship resistance or anonymity, where they observe all the traffic, not just a particular set of endpoints. I would caution about sort of the more limited 2 and 3 scenarios. These are not realistic, I think, because you have the ability to elevate them. If you can't intercept packets, that's fine. Just jam the shared medium whenever a packet that you want to interrupt can happen. And thanks to the way error detection works in Wi-Fi, you have enough microseconds to do this. So it's important that we maintain the same security goals as we always have, going back to whatever the RFC number that defines the internet security structure is, which is the Dolovial attacker, because the internet is made up of untrusted networks.
You're up next. Jonathan, I am not seeing you sending any audio.
Hopefully that's working.
Yes, go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so as mentioned yesterday, there's also the possibility of something like, what was it? RFC 4949 biz. And I think Stephen suggested that as a joke, but it actually does look like an appropriate sort of thing that we should aim for.
Yes, I think when that came up,
we're going to revise it, or we're going to amend it, extend it?
Oh, I mean, I don't particularly care. Just like that kind of glossary style RFC would probably be the easiest and most productive thing to aim for.
Yeah, I think that when it was mentioned yesterday, there were some concerns about it being a mammoth undertaking and likely to get bogged down. But it may still be worth considering, especially if it's an update rather than full biz. All right, Phil, you go ahead. Do you have a local mute on, Phil? I'm not hearing you.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm broadly in agreement with the principle that you identify the attack, not the attacker. The reason, as an aside, I thought that we had moved from Mallory to Mallet some time ago, because one of the things I think is very important, though, is that the original RSA paper said Alice and Bob are Turing machines, and they're not. Alice and Bob are people. And when you start to analyze the system, it is really, really critical to understand that Alice and Bob are people, and they are distinct from the machine with which they are connecting to the net. And if you don't make that distinction, you end up with stupidities like Alice remembering public keys. I think it's also equally important to remember that distinction on the attacker side. And whether you call it man in the middle or Mallory in the middle. No, Mallory isn't going to stand there in the middle. Mallory is going to, or Mallet, they're going to be a general who is marshalling an attack that is multi-pronged. And so when you're talking about the capabilities of Mallory, you should be thinking in terms of what does a human do in this situation as they are attacking. And it's always going to be a hybrid attack. And so I think it's important to change the nomenclature for that reason as well. You know, it's an observer in the middle, but it's always going to be a machine. It's not going to be a person.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That's a good point to keep in mind, that we do have humans involved as well as machines. We did hit the end of the extra 5 minutes, so I think we had a lot of good points here. I would love to see the discussion continue. For now, I think let's keep it on SAG, and if it gets to be too much volume, we can always make a new list to continue the discussion. But thank you, everyone, for your contributions. I hope we got a good number of them in the minutes, and let's continue the discussion via email. So let's continue on to the next topic, which involves me clicking in the same place twice to stop sharing and start sharing again. Here we go.
So now for something completely different. Ben and I wanted to get your perspective on what IETF's approach should be for addressing post-quantum security. While it's really important, we're not really interested in talking about what quantum computer roadmaps look like or the specifics of post-quantum algorithms. What we want to do is talk about what's happening in the ecosystem and what it means for the approach we should be taking. We have a couple slides for facilitation, so if you'll let us get through the tee up of those 3 kind of slides, we'll then open up the mic line, and we really want to hear your kind of perspective on what other framing we should be doing and some of the things that we may or may not want to be advancing forward with. So next slide, please. Okay, so to greatly oversimplify a highly technical and nuanced topic, the threat as we see it is that eventually there will be a quantum computer of sufficient size that's going to create problems for the current choices we're making for various crypto algorithms. You know, it may be a matter that the existing primitives we have may be weakened. It may be the case that they are outright kind of broken. So we believe that the desired outcome, given that threat, is to take all the various work that's already kind of underway in the open and publicly vetted, taking those quantum resistant crypto prisms under development and finding a way to adapt and bring them to the IETF to make sure that new working groups and new work is making use of those, or at least considering them. And where required, we're adapting previously completed protocols with this initial new post-quantum resistance. Now, there's a lot of unknowns kind of here, and I think in the discussion we're going to have, we're going to solve none of them, but we wanted to enumerate them because they may influence how we have the conversation, even if we don't necessarily know the answers. So just to be fully kind of upfront, we of course don't know when we're going to have the advent of said quantum computer that's going to undermine the crypto. We have some historical precedents for prior crypto migrations. What we know is, it takes a long time to do the design, the implementation, and even longer to do the modernization, which is to swap out the old way with the new way. And that's probably measured in minimally a decade, probably longer to do an algorithm kind of swap. Perhaps someone in the audience has already done the analysis to squint at all the prior IETF kind of work and knows exactly where we need to insert some post-quantum agility. If that exists, we're all ears and we want to know. But the exact scope of even what we want to tackle in the IETF isn't so clear. And also, the research to develop some of those quantum resistant approaches, or at least publicly kind of vet them, isn't done either. But we know that once we even had a list, it's probably not going to be a straight swap because the form and fit might be different of those primitives. So no good kind of answers on those unknowns. But what we want to talk about is, given those unknowns and given that desired outcome, if that is indeed the outcome the community feels we need to be heading down, how do we tackle that? So next slide, please. So a bunch of early thoughts on it. And first, just to really motivate, why are we talking about it here in SAG? And, why didn't we talk about it, at IETF 108, and why can't we wait till IETF 13? We're seeing an increase in conversation around different post-quantum capabilities across the working groups, and we're also getting an increased volume of inbound requests, private requests, for folks wanting to talk about more post-quantum work in the IETF or to do some assessment of fit. And we felt like that really was begging a broader conversation to get feedback from you. To be really clear, though, we already have chartered post-quantum work. LAMPS in the last couple months added some PKICs and CMS kind of scope there. While we have a bunch of unknowns, a couple of things are fairly clear to us. The first one is that whatever we decide to do, whatever is the scope of the work, it's going to be cross-cutting. It's not going to just happen in SEC. And kind of more broadly, it's going to happen in partnership with folks outside of the IETF. I mean, we're going to be in the business of the standardization, but in terms of core algorithm development and vetting, that's going to come from outside entities like the IRTF and CFRG, or vetting with the academic community or outside SDOs. While we may not know exactly the amount of work it is or what the natural clusters of that work, our feeling is there is going to be some work to do, and it's going to exceed the bandwidth of doing something that's AD sponsored. So kind of saying we have a doc, all right, Ben or Roman or the future ADs, you take that. It's likely not, the pipeline is going to be too big to reasonably do kind of turnaround. It's a bit of an open question whether the SEC dispatch process would be overwhelmed by bringing in kind of materials in that way, or whether we'd want to have more specialized expertise in reviewing those proposals. Likewise, we're fairly certain that if there's an active working group managing a particular protocol, that's absolutely the right place to talk about how we get post-quantum agility. But on the flip side, we also know that there are a number of orphan protocols, which are protocols that are important, are being used, but the working groups associated with them are closed, and we don't have an active maintenance working group to support them. And kind of based on the interest we're at least kind of seeing, we don't know exactly what a dedicated space would look like, but we think the IETF kind of needs one to talk about post-migration topics. Next slide, please. Okay, so given that tee up, and this is kind of the last slide before we really solicit your feedback, is as we think about that approach, there's at least 5 questions, maybe more, please do kind of share, about that we'd be interested in getting some feedback on. So kind of first, what is the way we want to have a conversation about it? So how do we come up with the plan to the plan? And there's a continuum of options. I mean, some of you may feel, and we'd be interested to hear that, we're talking about it enough, nothing more is required. We could talk about mailing lists, all the way up to something highly formal, which is what I call a MOP-style working group. So for folks not aware, the ops area created the media operations working group because the VTC operators wanted to have a standing place to talk about things with kind of industry. We'd also like to hear about what you think is the scope of the problem that IETF should be tackling. Listed there are a number of what we would consider orphan protocols that don't have an easy maintenance path, but probably will need crypto agility in the post-quantum phase. We're also interested to hear, how do you want that work to be done? I just previously talked about SEC dispatch. The other pendulum is pulling on the experience, the closest experience we have, at least to the last time we tried to do a wholesale shift of crypto, which was with Kernel, where we had a number of protocols that we wanted to imbue with elliptic curve and AEAD kind of functionality. And so we had a catch-all last resort working group. We could do that for post-quantum as well, and we have a draft kind of charter that's certainly not ready for prime time, but gives you a sense of what a template of that would look like. And we're equally interested to kind of understand, almost irrespective of the answers to the questions before, when do we start? Do we need to start now? Or are there gating functions that you perceive we need to be thinking hard about? And finally, do we have the right folks in the IETF to kind of tackle that, or do we need to start thinking about who else we would need to kind of bring in? So that's a big kind of mouthful. Before we turn over the floor, Ben, do you want to comment a little bit?
Yeah, I just want to note that we already had some good discussion in the chat room, of course, and one thing that came up was that we might want to split the sort of confidentiality parts and the authentication parts, because I guess the algorithms for those look kind of different, and the procedures you might need to follow for them also might be different. I think let's open up the queue. I saw Jonathan first.
So I think the key thing is that the reason why you'd want to split them is because confidentiality we need to worry about now, because if someone is recording traffic now, they can decrypt it in the future. If they get a quantum computer in 10 years' time, they can still decrypt traffic from today. Whereas authentication, that has to be sort of online, or rather, until someone has a quantum computer now, they can't break anything. So one of those things is super urgent and needs to be dealt with ASAP. And one of those things, like, we can leave until, we actually know what algorithms we want to use, for example.
Paul.
So I would love to repeat what Jonathan said, but even more emphatically, which is, if you think about CAs and such like that, they have keys that might be valuable for 20 years or so that they don't want people using. Encryption will always be more valuable than signing, because you can change your signing key easily. You can't change your encryption that you did before. So it would be extremely valuable for us to split those. But also related to that, one of the things you asked in this last slide is NIST PQ round 3. At this point, NIST is not assuming that they're going to have any signature algorithms anytime soon. And at least what they've said so far for signature algorithms is they may have multiple when they finish their first round. There is some, for those of you who are not following the NIST post-quantum mailing list, which is probably most people, there are a number of people who are also arguing for multiple outputs for encryption. That is the single winner idea, which has come out in previous NIST competitions, is getting a lot of pushback. So if we decide, okay, we're ready, we may, and we believe that the NIST post-quantum result is good, we may be actually facing multiple encryption algorithms. This makes things very hard, particularly because we truly don't know when we are going to need these. There are many cryptographers and engineers who believe that we may never need them. I mean, we certainly want to be prepared and all of that, but there are a fair number of people who believe we will never get exact quantum computers that would be the size that would be needed to break the current algorithms, much less if everyone just goes to RSA 4096 or something like that. So lots of variables there. Thank you.
Well, Sophia?
Yes, thank you. I want to echo back exactly what Jonathan said, in the sense that right now we need really to protect confidentiality, but not really forget authentication. The path that is going to be the most difficult one to replace for post-quantum cryptography is going to be authentication, because the parameters of the signature algorithms and also the operations required for the signing or verification procedures is much larger than compared to classical cryptography. So finding a good version of that is what is going to take more time, and actually thinking what impact is going to be to the latency and to the traffic and to the different network protocols. Right now, we're currently doing some work on TLS specifically to see how we can actually change the signature algorithms, and if indeed simply doing the change of using post-quantum signatures is enough, or is going to really have a big impact in the network itself. And I think that consideration has also to be for DNSSEC, for IPsec, and for everywhere that authentication happens. Confidentiality is a little bit more easy because, yes, you can easily swap the confidential algorithm for post-quantum confidential algorithms. So I fully support a specific working group to be developing on this, because it's really unclear what the path from not only how to be choosing the different algorithms, but also what kind of impacts the increasing of the sizing and computation time is going to have in the other underlying networks.
So I guess the potential impacts of the increased data transfer and computation size might even be broader than the security area, which is a good point to remember as well. Thank you. Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you. My understanding is that the problem with privacy and encryption, it fundamentally goes down to whether or not someone can break the key agreement algorithms. And I don't think I really understand all of that, but a lot of that situation to me, as someone said, is, a lot of that I think is slightly fungible in the sense that it's pretty easy to switch with a little bit of leeway. I mean, we can't switch in a month, but I think we can switch in several years easily. But the thing that scares me is actually the data at rest that's encrypted, and specifically that comes down to that's signed, and so I'm actually really much more concerned about the certification authorities and their keys and how they keep their private keys safe. And I think that a lot of that stuff's going to be with us for a long time. And I think that the work that's happening in LAMPS with respect to key kicks and the various different ways we can do it, I actually think that's a critical path for everything else. I think it should probably be left where it is. And once we've kind of solved that and have a little bit of running code, then I think that a kernel-like working group is the right way to go after that. And I wonder whether or not some of the algorithms that we're going to get may actually have some interesting attributes such that, wow, we're like, well, actually, it's better for, even if we never get to post-quantum, maybe this algorithm is still a better choice than something we have now already. So I think that's something to kind of watch out for, that we have to kind of make this worthwhile or financially worthwhile, even if we don't never have a post-quantum state.
That's a good point. So just a quick time check. I think we should give about 15 minutes more for this topic and leave a little bit for our general open mic. And we've got 6 people in the queue still, so try to keep it to just a minute or two if you can. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to just break a misconception I think that might be coming up here, in that people seem to think that quantum computing is on a linear path and Moore's law is going to take over. There are different types of quantum computer. There are the supercooled fridge computers, which get a lot of the press attention. That's probably a dead end. Scaling those is really hard. They're spending twice as much to get twice as much performance. That isn't the only type. There's also trapped ion quantum computers. If somebody gets one of those, it won't be a question of going from 56 to 100 qubits. They'll be getting 20,000, 100,000 qubits almost immediately, because they can use existing VLSI fab techniques. So don't get too caught up about the gradual evolution. It may be discontinuous if somebody can get trapped ion to work. Second point I'd like to make is that somebody mentioned dividing confidentiality and integrity. I'd also like to suggest that we have a divide between post-quantum algorithm approaches and other remediation approaches. One of the things in LAMPS is Russ's draft, sticking a symmetric key into an S-MIME, into a CMS package, so that you have a second key that you have to get and that makes it quantum resistant. There are many quantum resistant approaches that we can take that are based on symmetric cryptography that isn't critically that doesn't fall immediately with quantum computing, because we can go to 256 bits and that is enough for quantum resistance. And so things like resurrecting Kerberos, combining a Kerberos type system and a PKIX type system in the same system. I think that there may be much more interesting approaches in that area that we can get deployment on sooner, rather than just saying, oh, well, the post-quantum algorithms are going to sort it all out. They probably won't, because they're not going to exactly match what we expect from public key cryptography.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Ludovic, you are up next.
Thank you, and I fully support this work, and I really enjoy the discussion. So I just want to make the point on signature. So of course we all understand the capture now and decrypt later issue with key exchange, but still signature are also important because they are used for legal documents. So some of the documents signed with this digital signature must be valid for 30 years. So of course, you can update at some point the signature. It's easy, but we are speaking of billions of documents signed it. So it's quite a lot. So I think it's also urgent to address the signature concern.
Thanks. Ted, you're next.
So this is actually just a quick point on your last question, who do we need to engage beyond the current IETF community, and to suggest that maybe orphan protocols as a category may need to be broken down a bit. There are certainly some protocols that were produced in the IETF which are in fact no longer under active implementation. So they may not be dead in the fact that there's active traffic on the network about them, but there's no developer community to go to and ask for changes of this scale or type. So there are classes of traffic like that, and we need to separate those out from those in which there is an active set of developers and implementers that we could reach out to. Within that, I think there's kind of two classes, one in which they're here at the IETF to some degree and need to be gathered into a working group, and those where they're not at the IETF at all anymore, where it's basically moved out. So I think there's a triage element to this, where you're basically going to end up saying, there's no developer community for this protocol anymore, and even if we wrote a spec, it would never get deployed. So we warn people that it will not be post-quantum resistant because of this lack, and move on. There's a set where you say, okay, there's a group of developers here at the IETF, or who can be brought to the IETF. We'll form them into a working group, or bring them into the omnibus working group if we're going to go that direction. And the last one is going to be the hardest, where there is a working set of developers, but they've left the IETF for somewhere else, and there we're going to have to give up change control. So I think that's going to be a bit problematic, but that's really, I think, an ISG decision to figure out which ones are in which when it's setting up the charters for either the individual groups or the omnibus group. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks. That's really practical.
Hamid, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. I wanted to echo that the post-quantum key exchange mechanisms in particular, they don't always match up in protocols in the same way that we've traditionally used Diffie-Hellman, in particular in some of the more recent and fancy Diffie-Hellman uses, particularly using it as a non-interactive key exchange, where you have a party can combine a semi-static key, for example, with an ephemeral key, and in protocols like Signal. That doesn't really exist post-quantum anymore. So if you have a protocol that relies on non-interactive key exchange, you're really looking at changing your protocol flow, etc., and that will probably require some time to work through all of those consequences. It's not always a drop-in replacement, indeed.
Also definitely something the working group would have to keep in mind, or whatever form we advance this work in. Thanks. Joey, you're up.
I want to address some of these questions directly and also some points of view that other people have shared. It's clear that if we try to be proactive on approaching these possible and upcoming security threats or protocol threats or vulnerabilities that will come up post-quantum, it's clear that if we try to be proactive, we might not approach the solutions in the most effective way. All right. I get that. However, I think that we do have a chance here to be proactive and at least to start defining some things, at least to start defining some use cases, at least to start bridging some other people that are also working on this. For example, the people that presented at the DNS OARC 34, that they presented precisely on the impact of post-quantum cryptography on DNSSEC, for example. And then, like, similarly to what we did or what we have been doing at the QUIRG research group, I mean, just getting a definition on the use cases, on the requirements and those things, those take already a long time, similarly to the ADD group. And well, I just want to show my support that even if at some point we need to redefine the scope of the solutions that we're working on or something, I do not think that it will be wasted time, even if things are not as compatible as we would want them to be. So for all of this, I also think that the time to work on this is now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So it looks like the actual queue is empty, which is slightly surprising. So with no one else jumping in, I think we should probably go over to the general open mic. And of course, we can continue talking about post-quantum efforts in the general open mic as well. So let me go ahead and change the slides over just for completeness' sake. So, any security topics? Russ, please go ahead.
So I wanted to share that when we thought we were doing this really simple transition from SHA-1 to SHA-256, back when I was security area director, we thought we could do that in 5 years, and we were way wrong. We could get the RFCs done in like 18 months, but 10 years later, the transition was still going on. So just even looking at this swapping Diffie-Hellman for the KEM is something we need to, is going to take us probably more than 18 months to get the RFCs. So yes, I support, let's get going.
Becker?
So it's probably worth noting that like different things proceed on different timescales, right? I mean, that's obvious, but just to recap, if we had an algorithm, if we had like a post-quantum signature algorithm and a post-quantum, a key exchange algorithm, we all agree was good, right? That could be landed in, you could land both of those like in your average like TLS or IPsec or, SSH stack, like now, right? And pretty quickly actually get to like, extremely like wide levels of deployment for the key exchange, and pretty quickly get to like 0 levels of deployment for the authentication system. And the time scale for the authentication system is like dramatically longer, even with the protocols are defined, because you need to roll out like for a TLS or IPsec, you need to roll out like new PKI. Fortunately, like now CABF has like shortened the maximum lifetime certificates, so actually like you could imagine doing that cycle like only like I think a couple years, maybe 3 or 4. from the point where basically, you required everybody to have one to the point where you like rolled it out. Maybe it's even worse for SSH. In principle, it's probably faster, but in practice, maybe it's worse. I guess it's also worth noting, as I'm sure some people noted, that the value proposition of each of these is somewhat different, which is to say that you get value by doing the key exchange like soon, but you get value by doing the authentication only when you stop accepting the old algorithm. So like that's actually quite a bit down the line. I guess I'm sort of like somewhat enthusiastic about trying to like get these post-quantum key establishment things in, as long as not too expensive. And I think even trying contrary to the conversation in Jabber, I don't actually think it's a problem to try a couple of them. It'd be good to get some sense of where like the cut points are for like what produces unacceptable performance degradation. I think I'd really like to hold fire on like all the PKI stuff until like we have one thing we think is pretty good and pretty drop in, because like the effort of like rolling out a new like PKI algorithm is like extraordinarily high, and people aren't going to have energy for doing it very often.
That's a good point. DKG, you're back up. And we are not hearing you, but you are showing up as mic active.
Text.
Hi DKG. Seems to be on now.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that when we talk about confidentiality, I think many people are assuming that confidentiality happens in an online system, because they're thinking about TLS and SSH. But there are store and forward confidentiality situations that we care about. MLS is kind of in that boat, but it's not as store and forward as other things like S-MIME. So I just wanted to point out that when we're thinking about the confidentiality case, it's not all as easy to roll out a new algorithm as it is to roll out an update to TLS. Not that that was ever easy, but it might even be harder in store and forward.
Yeah, that seems almost certain, because you have desynchronized communication, and you have to know that the other endpoint is going to be able to handle it before you can start generating it. That's a good point. Paul, you're back.
Since we have a bit more time. One of the other things to remember is that quantum computers, as they start to be being built, if they are ever successfully built to the large enough size, are going to be exceptionally expensive per instance to break. So current estimates are that it might cost literally $100 million to break a single key pair. That will, of course, get cheaper over time, assuming that the engineering gets better over time. But given that, an attacker, the early attackers who might own these things, will certainly, most likely, only break key pairs that have high value. And the highest value ones, of course, are going to be confidentiality, not signatures. Even if you could break the signature, break, for example, a CA's private key, you would only have a very limited number of times you could use that before everyone notices it's not the CA who's actually doing that signing, and they would roll their key, and now you've lost your $100 billion or whatever. So as we start thinking about which ones to work on first, not only should we be thinking about who are the people who would be most affected by previous keys being broken, but also what will the attackers want to break? And I sincerely think that they'll want that they already know which messages, which encrypted messages they very much would like to see the inside of. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Phil, you might be the last word.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think that we're going to be seeing a different character to the way that we use crypto, particularly for authentication, in the way that we're using encryption authentication today. We do a public key authentication and just throw it away. We just don't think about it. I think that in the future, we're going to be much more careful about throwing away that security context, particularly when you're talking about talking to a constrained device. And so we're going to be looking to personal symmetric session key managers with devices and other things that we're using as a way of backing up whatever else we're doing. And so we're probably going to be looking at new objects that we need to define that don't really fit into what we have defined for the old public key world, because we didn't need them. Oh, and the other thing about confidentiality, this is one of the few things, the very few things that blockchain is actually good for. If you take a document, you put it in a blockchain, you know that it went in there at that time. And so maybe what we need to think about as one of those pro tem measures is an open spec that doesn't involve crypto or criminal currency ideology as a way of solidifying our signatures.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Thanks,
That's the
Phil.
last
So
word.
we're at time. I think we've heard definitely a lot of interest in this topic and a good number of voices saying that we should start talking about this more now. So that's really good feedback, and I think the 80s will sync up and get some thoughts about where to do that. Thank you, everyone, and see you in Gather.
Thanks. Have a good IETF week.